What's going on, listeners? Tonight's episode is going to be basically a Signs of Sasquatch 101 discussion. So kick back, relax, and enjoy learning about what to look for when it comes to Bigfoot when you're out in the wilderness. So my question for all the Bigfoot believers and skeptics alike is this. How do you reconcile the fact that literally every culture in the world today has legends and connections to the creature we often refer to as Bigfoot, dating back to the dawn of time? Is this just coincidence, or is it something more? Why do all the stories contain the same recurring descriptions and themes? Whether they call them Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, Skunk Ape, Yowie, or some other name, the reports are all the same. From America to China, the Himalayas to Australia, literally every continent has the same phenomenon. Why do we see such similarities? How could this story permeate throughout the entire globe? Is there definitive proof of the existence of Bigfoot? That's what I'm on a mission to figure out. Join me as we uncover the stories, the evidences, and the unbelievable yet true events that have occurred all throughout the world. My goal is to turn skeptics into believers, and believers into knowers. I'm Riley Woolner, and welcome to the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. All right, listeners, so tonight I got Cooper here with me, and this is going to be kind of a Bigfoot 101 class, more specifically a what to look for when it comes to Bigfoot, what kind of signs, what kind of trace evidence there is of Bigfoot. That's the sort of main subject or class that we're going to be kind of having on this episode, what we're going to be talking about. So I got Cooper here. The first thing we want to discuss is Bigfoot tracks. And just to kind of start off, I think everyone listening knows that that's probably the first thing you think of when you think of Bigfoot. That's the Bigfoot footprints and the castings. But just to kind of start off, Cooper, is there anything that recently you've learned about in this subject that makes the footprints, the tracks seem more credible, more interesting? Anything that is something fascinating you've learned about them recently?
Yeah, you and me have talked about this a couple weeks ago. I was perusing the internet on Facebook, and I ran into a little video where a guy he stopped using his shoes and was just walking barefoot everywhere. And I always thought it was kind of interesting because our feet look kind of similar to Sasquatch prints, but I always felt like our feet were more narrow and the toes were bigger on Sasquatch footprints. And I watched this video. He doesn't wear any shoes, or if he does, it's probably hardly ever, because he had videos of him walking around, going running and all kinds of stuff in bare feet. His feet, after not wearing shoes for so long, started to flatten out a little bit, because I think our bodies aren't designed to wear shoes. That's just we've created shoes ourselves to I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if shoes probably aren't a great thing for our feet, but our feet are supposed to be able to flex and move when we step, and shoes are kind of keep our feet narrow. So I think when we're, when our feet are squished like that, they stay like that all the time. But if you're walking barefoot, the pads of your feet start to flatten out a little bit and widen. And this dude's feet were super wide. And when I looked at that, I immediately thought, that looks literally just like Sasquatch feet. And it would make sense because obviously Sasquatch doesn't wear shoes. He walks around barefoot. That's why we have the tracks we have. And that hit me. I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy that the feet, this guy's feet look like identical to a Sasquatch footprint, just smaller, obviously.
Yeah.
And because I had thought that before, where I was like, okay, well, we're thinking that somehow Bigfoot's more human-like than ape-like, but the footprints look totally different than ours look. Like, the toes are bigger, the heel up to the toes widens out a lot, and I thought that was weird because our feet don't do that or look like that, but it makes total sense that it does look like that if you're not wearing shoes, because that's what your feet are supposed to look like.
Yeah, and I remember that video you sent. That was pretty wild, like how quickly his feet sort of adapted, you know? Like
Yeah.
that was, I think, one of the weird parts to me, and like how quickly like his feet kind of calloused up over time. It was like, they describe how Bigfoot, almost the bottom of their feet almost look like dog pads. You know how the like dogs and cats like have like padding on there, and maybe like we as humans would actually have that too if we, hadn't started using shoes. And that guy, I think, is kind of proof of that. And one thing I wanted to mention too was, like you said, that they do look different than ours, but the Bigfoot footprints look way closer to humans than they do any ape footprints.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking of, because you think about like gorilla or chimpanzee feet, and their toes, I just Googled it right now, I'm looking at it. They look so different than a human foot. The big toe, or it looks like a thumb on there, and it sticks off to the side, whereas on a Sasquatch print, all the toes are in the top, lined up just like a person's, or I should say a human.
Yeah.
Whereas the gorilla, it basically just looks like a weird-shaped hand.
Yeah, they got like those really long, spindly kind of toes. And, me and you have kind of come to not necessarily the conclusion, but we lean more towards the idea that Bigfoot isn't just some ape, that there's some kind of human element to them. And I think the footprints are a gold mine when it comes to that idea, just because all it takes is what you just did right there. Google it, and you can see that like a gorilla's foot doesn't look anything like what people's like claim, what they claim when they find footprints of Bigfoot. Like, they're totally different, Yeah, they don't look exactly like a human's. They're a bit bulgier and wider and bigger, but like they're definitely not like an orangutan's foot,
Yeah, and I looked at chimpanzee feet. They look just like the gorillas. All of them look just like the same.
Yeah.
Even the like baboon feet, they all have those long toes, and the big toe sticks off to the side, which is literally nothing like Sasquatch footprints.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man. Like all these quote unquote researchers, these guys out there that appear on like Animal Planet or whatever for their specials, and they're out there claiming that this is just some monkey a really smart monkey or ape that we haven't caught up with yet. I'm just like, dude, you're crazy. Like this, I'm not saying that can't be a possibility, that there's some kind of monkey out there that has evolved totally different type of feet, more human-like feet, and that's out there. I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but I'd say it's a very slim chance, Like, I just think that when you see these footprints, you've seen, Cooper, the couple of casts that I have that have been given to me. And for the audience listening, when I was working as a high school teacher in Colton, Oregon, which is a small little country town, there was a custodian there named Frank, and he was a Bigfoot enthusiast. He was into the whole thing, but not just into the whole phenomenon and liked learning about it. He straight up claimed to like go tracking these things. Like, he knew of like a few different like family groups that were in the area. And he had a couple casts that he gave to me, and one of them was supposed to be sort of a copy of Patty's footprint, the Patterson Gimlin film, and the other one is one that was local, and it was way bigger. It was huge. He claimed it was from a male, and it's interesting because I don't know if I ever told you this, Cooper, but when I went to the gas station there to get a soda one time, I came in there, and on the counter there was like a bunch of books for sale, and they were all about the monster of Goat Mountain. And Goat Mountain was this I could see it every day from my classroom window, and I'd look out, and it's just this big, huge forest covered like hill. And I asked some of my students about what the monster of Goat Mountain was, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's like a Bigfoot kind of creature that apparently like runs around up there," and they all had stories about it and stuff. And I have the casting of the Goat Mountain Bigfoot, and you've seen it, man. It's big. Like it's like almost as long as my whole like forearm. But
Yeah, it definitely is. It's huge.
yeah, it is crazy. So, oh, and another thing that I learned, and I think you heard this too. It might have been from the David Paulides Bigfoot 101 videos. The idea that like Bigfoot doesn't walk like we do, where it's kind of like staggered right to left, right to left. Like it seems like they go in a straight line, like one, like right, left, of course, but like right in front of each other, you know, like in a line. Yeah. Like, which I find that fascinating because I don't know how exactly they would walk like that, you know, like how do you, they must have some kind of different way that their legs and feet work than ours, because I can't walk, you know, unless I'm going to waddle like a chicken or something. Like I can't really walk with, especially with how far apart their tracks are, because they say that's kind of a way to distinguish whether or not they're legit footprints or not from a Bigfoot, is like, are they going out from side to side, left to right, or are they going right one in front of the other, you know? And to be able to stretch your legs out that far and to walk from one foot directly in front of the other like that, that'd be like super tough, especially for like a hoaxer, you know?
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know how you step, like, it would be impossible to walk that far.
Yeah. And
your feet that far apart.
Yeah, and you know, something I've kind of thought about too is like, what's just weird to me is the fact that like these footprints, they exist. Like they're not all the mathematics show that like there's no way that the thousands of, if not tens of thousands of these tracks that have been collected over the years since like the 60s by various people, there's no way that they were all hoaxed. So therefore, if even one of them is real, how does that not give someone like pause to think or scratch their head and be like, huh, what the heck was this? You know what I mean? Like, for me, I feel like that's just so perplexing that the whole world isn't up at arms and being like, what the heck was that? Why there's a Bigfoot, you know, there's a huge footprint. Like what left that behind, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause they found footprints, you know, up in the Himalayas. I think I can't remember who found the footprints. I think it might have been I'm trying to remember. I just saw this the other day. It was
Did they find them recently?
The article that I saw was also on Facebook from another Bigfoot group. I can't remember which. Don't remember dates or anything, but I think it was fairly recently. It was there was some army up hiking in some snowy mountainy area, and they found tracks too.
Yeah. See,
so,
like
these are recent.
Yeah, for me, it's just perplexing that not every person who hears about that and really thinks about it and realizes, okay, this isn't a hoax. How is it that they're just like, oh yeah, that's weird, and then just move on with their day? Like, I don't get it. Like, for me, I'm like, as soon as I hear that, that's one of the things, the first bits of trace evidence that for me was like, okay, I'm hooked. What is going on here? You know?
Yeah, so I just looked it up. It was the Indian Army in the Himalayas, and this was just back in 2019. So I saw the article the other day, but it's from a while ago.
Okay, so 2019. That's like not that long ago. This isn't like some old article that you scrapped up from the 70s. Like I don't think that what would the Indian Army, like, and we're talking about the army from India. I'm guessing that this is the Himalayan mountains that are in northern India. What would they stand to gain by saying, hey, we found a bunch of huge footprints? You know, like, that's not something you joke about as the military, you know what I mean?
No. It ended up on, like, BBC and in the news all over the place, so yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, for me, I feel like tracks are definitely one of those, like, there's a reason why that's the most iconic bit of evidence when it comes to Bigfoot, you know, other than the stories. And also, before we get into more of the sort of telltale signs, I wanted to kind of just discuss for the audience listening, one of the aspects of the whole Sasquatch phenomena that I think me and you both find so fascinating is the fact that the Bigfoot is always reported to be like consistently the same in how it looks. There's some minor variation, like the color of hair or, the expression it had on its face or whatever. But like, it's not like people are coming out of the woods and describing, oh, it had a bear's face and a monkey tail and the legs of a panther. It was crazy. No, they're always coming back saying, look, what I saw was essentially a person, covered in hair, but like 7, 8, 9 feet tall, and they'll defer on like whether or not it was massively huge like a bodybuilder or if it was more slim and toned like a basketball player, or they'll talk about, its hair was orangish or its hair was black. But like, what I find just kind of cool is the fact that that just lends itself more to the credibility of the subject matter, because most animals, look at like I'm trying to think. A dog isn't a good example because we've tampered with those, but like deer, everyone who goes into the forest and sees a deer will come back describing the same thing. Now, some might be like, oh, well, the one I saw had antlers that were like, only a couple feet long, and others will be like, oh, the one I saw had like 6 foot long antlers, or they'll be like, the deer I saw had a black tail. The other one will be like, oh, the one I saw had a white tail. It's exactly how you would expect to find something out in the wilderness to be reported as. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the counts come back as being pretty similar.
Yeah, and the other part of it that most people kind of take for granted is the idea that like they're always talked about on 2 legs, and bears rarely get up on 2 legs, and if they do, it's usually pretty awkward looking. They're not going to walk smoothly. I don't think even someone who, I would say most people in their lives have seen bears on Animal Planet if they haven't seen them in real life. Like, we all know how bears move, what they look like. No one's going to see some 8 foot tall human-like being covered in hair walking on 2 legs and be like, and confuse it for a bear. You know what I mean? Or see a bear on its hind legs and think, oh yeah, that's what a Sasquatch looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there has been some times though where maybe a bear did stand up and someone mistook it for that, just because they didn't stay long enough to get a better look. But as far as like it moving and stuff, yeah, from what I've heard and stuff, is that if they do stand up on their back legs, they can't really walk very far, or stay up that long.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I agree with you. I feel like, sure, there could be one in a couple, I don't know, 67 reports that was actually just a bear, but I feel like whoever saw that, like you said, either they did not stay long enough or they're a dummy. Like, how can you how can you mistake that? The one thing I do find kind of creepy though and weird, and this too, is the reports that you get of when they do drop down to all fours and then they walk around, like crawl around like a spider.
Yeah. Yeah, that every time I hear people's stories about that, it's just like the weirdest thing to try and picture that.
Yeah. And for me, when I hear about that, like, once again, maybe I'm just too gullible, but I'm like, to me, that lends itself once again to the credibility of the subject matter, just because that is not something that you would just make up if you're trying to get people to believe you. You know what I mean? Like, if you are making it up, you wouldn't make that part up, because that would make it way too unbelievable,
Yeah, and I remember the first time I heard that from something, it was kind of like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because in my mind, it was, it's exactly what the media and stuff paint the picture of, is that it's just a giant monkey. And so when you think about it, it's like that's really interesting that it get on all fours like that and crawl around like a spider. Because I pictured it. It's weird because in my head, Sasquatch was an ape, but then also thinking about it on all fours was weird because everyone talked about it on 2 feet. So then it goes down on all fours, and it just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and if it was an ape dropping down to all fours, we know what apes look like when they get on all fours. They're on their knuckles. their back legs are kind of bent down. Their back is sort of is also kind of caved in a little bit. Like everyone knows what a monkey or an ape kind of looks like when it gets on all fours. If someone who was just making up a story and wanted to get attention, and by saying like, "Oh, I saw a Bigfoot in the woods," you'd think that they would try to appeal to the most amount of people to believe their story by saying, one, they would probably just say, "Oh, I just saw a Bigfoot. It was walking on two legs." And two, if they wanted to throw in there that it went down on two legs, they would probably say, "Oh, it got down on two legs like a gorilla." Like if you're trying to get people to believe your story while you're lying, you wouldn't say it got down on all fours and crawled around like a spider. Like that's not gonna help your case. That's why for me, I feel like they must be telling the truth.
Yeah, and when people describe it, they don't say, like every podcast I've listened to, people talk about it. They don't say, "Oh, it got down and crawled around like a monkey." Everyone says, the best way I can describe it is it looked like a spider.
Which is just so weird. Truth is stranger than fiction. Like that just, of all the creatures for it to resemble when it does that, that is just one of the weirdest ones to hear about. There was that video you sent me that showed like it was a FLIR like heat vision or whatever camera that was showing. It almost looked like it was doing like an army crawl.
Yeah.
And so clearly these things seem to be able to be comfortable on all fours when they need to be, but it's not how you'd expect. I think I would guess that they probably prefer to walk standing up, but like if they need to drop onto all fours, like I guess they can. Like I don't know. That's just I've heard that time and time again from people's stories about seeing these things, and it's just weird, man. But anyways, we're gonna move on to the next sort of thing for people to be aware of when it comes to what is what to look for when thinking there might be Sasquatch around, and that is the nasty smell. And I'm guessing you've heard about this before, right, Cooper?
Yeah, I haven't personally smelled it, but I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, I've never. I mean, as far as I'm aware, because I think I have smelt some nasty things out in the countryside or out in the woods, but I've always just attributed that to like roadkill or something like that, and it was never preceded by a Bigfoot, So I can't say that I have smelt that particular smell. But for most people, what they'll describe it as is usually either one of these things or a combo of all of them, and it's usually something like a boggy, swampy smell, or trash, like garbage kind of smell, or like death, like a dead animal kind of smell, or even like fecal matter, like feces, poop. Like that's usually kind of the smell that people will describe. And there's even like down in Florida, it's earned the creature's name as the skunk ape, because of that.
Yeah, I've heard it smells like rotting flesh, which would make sense, because if they have all that hair, they never take a bath.
Yeah, and that's the interesting kind of part of the discussion is like, do you think my wonder is like, do they just smell because they're a hairy dude who's running around in the woods and never takes a bath, or is it something that they can like give off like a pheromone, like how like animals can give off a certain smell for like mating or to warn other animals off, like a skunk, like I don't know, like I just if it's more human like, I feel like it would be just the fact that it hasn't showered, But if it's got some kind of animal qualities to it, then maybe the second part could be a possibility. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, because with the hair, if they're, sleeping and moving around all the time, they're sweating. Because I guess people don't really put off that bad of. Well, actually, that's not true. Some people do smell pretty bad.
Yeah,
Um,
we've all experienced that. Yeah.
if they were covered in hair and didn't take a bath, I can't even imagine how much worse they could smell. So
Yeah, I guess you got a good point there. So, yeah, who knows? I guess that's something that eventually we might get to a point where we find out if there's ever a point where the subject starts to get investigated more deeply. But so that's something to be aware of if you're out in the forest or the mountains or desert or wherever you're at, and you start to smell something really really disgusting. Keep your nose closed and your eyes open because you might see one of these creatures.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next sort of sign of these things, which is the tree formations. And this one has always been kind of fascinating to me. I actually saw another set of these, what I think are these tree formations, on a hike that I was at here in Utah just a couple days ago. Actually, it was it's for the audience, I think I might have described this before a little bit in one of the past episodes, but like when people refer to tree formations, if you look up on Google, just look up like Bigfoot tree formations, you'll find like I've seen a few different, I would say like 3 different types. And correct me on these, Cooper, if I'm wrong, if there's more, but I think the one that I think comes to mind most readily is like when you see these like full on like trunks of trees that have kind of been like stripped of their leaves and other like twigs and stuff, and then they kind of set them up. They're like set up like against each other in like this really complex sort of formation, so that way they're all kind of leaning on each other like the structure of a teepee almost,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll even find them where like the roots of the tree have been, it's been pulled out completely and the roots are pointing towards the sky and the top of the tree is down in the dirt. And so that's like one kind of tree formation. And then the second I've seen or heard of is more simple, where it's like a bunch of sticks that are all smaller sticks and they're all leaning around like the bigger trunk of a tree. So it does kind of look like a smaller teepee. And then the third, which is the most sort of fascinating to me, is the one that I've heard described only a couple of times, but it's where like if you look up to the canopy above you in the trees, sometimes like twigs and things will be like bent and twisted together to form almost like these rune-like shapes in the canopy above you that almost look like esoteric or something, like, I don't know. But those are the kind of 3 tree quote-unquote formations that I've heard about. Have you heard of any others or have anything to say on that?
Not. I haven't really, I guess, heard about like different kinds. I was listening to I was either listening to a podcast or watching a video. I can't remember which one it was, but I think I was reading a transcript of the podcast. That's what it was. The guy in it, I think it was from the Olympic Project up here in Washington, and he was talking about, someone asked him, like, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen? And I guess he got contacted by someone who was logging. They were driving a lift through some heavily wooded area in the woods. I can't remember exactly what area of Washington. But basically, he's like, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, and he's like, I just came across something super weird. And so he went out there to look at it, and it was basically, the way he described it was like they were these little domes made out of trees that had been woven together in like literally the middle of the woods. And there was like, it looked like someone was bedding in there. It was super weird.
It really is. Have you seen any of them yourself?
When I first started looking into this topic, I had seen some beforehand that I didn't really notice. Because I remember my wife and I were out hiking one day, and there was I remember seeing a tree where like the root system was up in the tree itself, and I thought that was like, I remember talking to you about it. We're like, that's weird. How the heck does a tree get up there like that? And now it's like, well, I know what it could have been.
Yeah.
And then we were on a different hike, and it was the same kind of situation where I was walking around and noticed kind of something like you described, where there's almost like a teepee formation. Definitely was something that couldn't have I don't think would have ended up like that. And I've sent you that picture before, where there's like probably like 6 or 7 different sticks that are all like connected, kind of like a teepee formation.
Yeah, I remember that picture.
Yeah, this was after I kind of started looking at the topic. So when I saw that, it was like the moment I saw it, I knew what I could be looking at.
Yeah, that's cool. When you were at Mount Rainier on the last episode that we had you on, you were talking about that. Did you see any when you were there?
No, and I kept my eye out for stuff like that. I didn't see anything.
No, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like when you see something like that where, and I've seen plenty of these. I remember Les Stroud from Survivor Man, he has a video on YouTube where he talks about how, a lot of times we just walk by these and we think, oh, that's just, how the trees fell because of nature, right? That's just what we say. Oh, it's nature, right? And you don't realize until you actually take a look at it and be like, okay, naturally, how would that have worked? Especially the ones where the tree roots are like up in the air. I'm like, okay, only a person would have been able to do that. And when you're way out in the middle of nowhere, the idea of a person randomly wanting to take a tree out of the ground and shove it up into the air amidst a bunch of other ones that are all weirdly woven into it and connected and stacked on top of it and stuff, like that just doesn't make any sense to me as to why someone would want to do that, unless of course they were doing it for fun, knowing that people who are into Bigfoot are going to see it and think it has to do with Bigfoot. But even that, I'm like, why? I like pranks, I like pranking people and seeing their surprise or their look of confusion or whatever. But like this, whoever is doing that, if they're doing that, they'd have to leave a camera out there to see the reaction. And you don't see, most of the time these are found out in the middle of nowhere, right? And like no one's going to leave a camera out there just for, if someone really that's how they get their kicks and giggles from, is watching people be confused about tree formations that are attributed to Bigfoot. I'm like, dude, you got to get a better hobby, man. Like there's no way that people are going to, and you wouldn't, I don't know, how often do you think people are like, hey dude, let's move all these trees around because someone might come across these and think it has to do with Bigfoot, ho ho ho, and then walk away? Like what? Like, I don't find that very likely. Do you?
No, I mean, it could happen, obviously, like anything's possible, but like the likelihood of someone walking into the woods and like grabbing random sticks and putting them up in the tree, just like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose someone would do that or could, but like,
yeah, I mean, I'm not putting it
as they're seen.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Exactly, as frequently as they're seen, and just I'm not putting it past someone to like hear a podcast like this or hear it from their Bigfoot buddy, buddy who's into Bigfoot, like that's something that is attributed to them, and then they go and do it. Sure, I guess anything's possible. There might be dudes like that who go out and do it, but like, I don't know. I feel like you're not even getting the payoff though. For me, I'm like, if I'm going to do a prank, I want to see someone's reaction, and you're not going to see that reaction at all. You're just, is it that funny to you to go out throughout the day thinking that some random person might come across your tree formation that you made and that they thinking it's Bigfoot instead of you? Like, I don't know. I just whoever that is that's doing that, you're a weirdo. Like,
yeah.
Like if
stop doing that.
Yeah, stop doing that if you are, because it's not. It's just strange, man. Like that, go find something else that's funnier. If you're whoever is out there possibly doing that, if you're listening, like, but that's the thing. I really don't think that's the case. Like, and the thing is, often too, those tree formations, the trees themselves are sometimes huge. Like there's no way a person is gonna easily be able to pull that out and stack them up like that. That's why I think it's honestly the best solution when you see that is Bigfoot, like, because they'd be one of the only ones strong enough to yank out a tree like that and set it up in that way. And for the audience, like, just go check out the visuals like online to know what we're talking about here, because some of them you'll see there's like, I don't think there's a very high likelihood that the strength of a normal person would be able to handle something like that, you know? But Cooper, what do you think they could mean? Like, what's the purpose of them?
I don't really know, to be honest. I know when I was watching Les Stroud's Bigfoot show, and he was out there with I can't remember what his name was. They were in Canada.
Oh, Todd Standing.
Todd Standing, yeah. And his whole thing was that maybe they're a sense of direction or a warning to people that are coming through the area. So, like, basically mark, like, hey, don't come past this area. But I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, I've heard, and this happens all the time, and especially in this subject. I think sadly what I'm about to say is something that a lot of Americans, when it comes to sort of mysterious folklore kind of stuff, they'll usually say what I'm about to say, but like, I've heard that the Native Americans say that they used to use those same kind of like tree formations for themselves to act as kind of like, sort of like how we use signs and traffic signals and stuff in our modern urban sprawl, you know, but for the woods, to kind of indicate like hunting grounds are that way, or the village is over this way, or something like that. And you know, I haven't personally spoken with any person of indigenous American descent to tell me, oh yeah, that is something our ancestors used to do. That's just something you hear about usually in these circles, you know. But I don't think that there's anything untruthful about that anything that seems phony about that. I feel like that would actually be a really good way to mark up the wilderness when you're out there hunting, you know, because it's not like many animals are going to mess with that. So why wouldn't Bigfoot it's possible, I think, that maybe the natives learned it from the Bigfoot, or the Bigfoot learned it from the natives. Like, you never know.
Yeah, well, and then if you think about it from a different standpoint, kind of with where our thoughts are on the whole topic, if they are indeed another species or a hybrid of human, then it could make sense that, you know, maybe they did learn it from the Native Americans, or they just did it on their own because they were already kind of human.
Yeah, I mean, there's high likelihood that they just had the same practice because they also are either, you know, mostly or partly human. So, yeah, totally a solid way to view it. But yeah, anyways, those are definitely something to be looking for. I know that ever since I was made aware of them, I see a lot of them. Granted, not all of them I attribute to Bigfoot, because some of them do look like they're just natural, like trees falling over on one another after the winter. But there's quite a few of them that I'm like, that doesn't look that natural to me, you know. So keep an eye out for those, listeners. The next one is the tree breaks, and the tree, like the breaks, whether we see them broken or the sound of trees breaking. And I think that one, we're not gonna spend too much time on it, but I haven't ever heard trees breaking out in the woods, but I have seen them where I think I mentioned this in one of my previous episodes, where I was in Silverton, Oregon, or out in the logging trails around there with that old cowboy Steve, who I talked about, who knew the area and knew where the Sasquatch were, and he took me to that area where about 9-10 feet up, way higher than where Steve could reach without like having to get like a stool or something. Like, there was all these saplings broke in like the same places, and they were green, they were new, like they weren't old wood, they were fresh wood that had been like twisted and snapped downwards, and you could still see the splinters on most of them, and the rest of the tree would hang from where the break was. That was just weird to me, because I remember being like, if this was loggers, they wouldn't do that, because trees are money. Why would you break newly planted trees? That just doesn't make any sense, you know? And that's, they say that this is once again a part of the apparent folklore of, or apparently the folklore of the Native American tribes that were of the area, but that Bigfoot will do that to mark territory or mark trails or something like that. But like I said, I never actually heard the trees getting snapped. You have heard that though, Cooper, when on your last on the last podcast you talked about that.
Yeah, you're talking about it just being like super quiet.
Super quiet, and then you hear that big loud tree snap, you know?
Yeah, and that might have been part of the reason why we heard the tree break, was just because of how quiet it was. But when when that tree broke, it honestly sounded like, it did sound like thunder. It was so loud.
Yeah.
So dang loud.
Yeah, and I've always found that interesting. One, just how loud it was, and then two, like, I don't know if we did a good enough job explaining on the last episode that Cooper was on, but for me, the likelihood of if trees breaking was just a common occurrence up around Rainier, you'd think you would have heard it more consistently. Like, you would have heard trees breaking on your way up, and you would have heard them also on your way down. But yet you only heard the two very loud tree breaks when you guys were walking around in the pitch black, you know? And to me, that just is a little suspicious that, you know, if it was just natural, you just happen to have two very large trees break at around the same time. You know, you'd think they would be more spread out, or you would have heard one on the way up and one on the way back or something. But no, it was like both of them right there. And I mean, I guess maybe my argument isn't that great because Mother Nature is sporadic often. Who's to say that you can't have two trees breaking right after each other? But I don't know. I feel like you don't hear about that as often. Even Les Stroud from Survivor Man talks about how he rarely will see trees fall over or break that often, you know? And if it's something that a Bigfoot does to sort of to be a warning to the other Bigfoot or to humans or something, and with Rainier having such a history with the Bigfoot, like that, just, I don't know, makes sense. And with just the fact of it being so loud, like a huge tree like that, you know?
Yeah, and another thing I was thinking of just now is, you know, it sounded like it was like right adjacent with us from the trail, and then like 10 minutes later we heard another one, and it wasn't like it was back behind us. It was literally like kind of the same area off adjacent to the trail from us. So I don't know.
They both came from the same area, or they were, what do you mean?
Like, if you took, how do I word this? If there's another trail running right along us, like something is paralleling us, and the tree broke, and then we went 10 more minutes down the trail, and then another tree broke, kind of like it was paralleled with us again. Yeah,
see, now that to me is more suspicious and kind of weird, because I have experienced that something paralleling me twice, actually, and while out in the wilderness, I never heard the tree break, but I've heard the bushes rustle right next to me as I'm walking along, and it was for the audience, I think, has already heard on my past stories, but that is something that Sasquatch are known to do. And if they're also known to break trees, I'm like, I feel like they might have been there, man. Like, the more that I think about your experience, I just super interesting. The next thing is the wood knocks. And this is kind of the similar thing, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. But for the audience listening, another thing to pay attention to while you're out in the forest is not just the sound of a tree breaking, but also just the sound of like a little sort of knock on the tree, because apparently that's something that people report all the time, is hearing what they call wood knocks. And it can sound anything like just a tap, 2 or 3 taps, to someone taking a freaking Louisville Slugger baseball bat to the trunk of a tree, and being super loud. So that is fascinating. I can't say that I've heard the tree knocks very closely. I think when I was out with Steve that I heard them in the distance once, but I have never had them up close. Have you?
No, and I'm sure I've heard it before, but I just never really processed it.
Yeah.
Because, it's just another noise while you're out hiking or whatever. You don't really think about it.
Yeah. It's so funny how we do that, man. Like, when we're out in nature, there's so many things that we're just like, oh yeah, that's what being outside is like, weird stuff, and you don't even like acknowledge it because you're just like, yeah, it could have been anything. And then, but you never pause to think what that anything could have been. Because if you do, then you start, I think, then you'd start to realize, wait a second, what could have made that noise? It's not like an owl is going to smack a tree with a piece of wood,
Yeah, and we've talked about that before too. Like only things with like opposable thumbs can pick things up and smack it against something or throw it. So what other animal out in the woods has the ability to pick up a stick and hit it against another tree or a log or something?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, and that leads us into the next one, which is rock throwing, or and like you said, that's something that would require thumbs. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because I talked a lot about it on one of my previous episodes where I talked about that time when I was out with Steve, which I've now referenced like 3 times. But when a rock was thrown at us, and that's something that lots of people get. You get reports of that all the time where they're just hanging out in their campsite or they're walking along on the trail and all of a sudden pebbles just start getting tossed towards them, or pine cones or something, and they can't see where it's coming from, but they're just getting tossed. Or even worse, like someone's at a lake and all of a sudden a huge boulder goes flying over their head and gets splashed into the lake or something. And so it's like, okay, for something to get thrown, like you said, Cooper, you need fingers. You need thumbs.
Yeah, and I know my parents have a kind of a story, which a lot of this too is like, I can't go back and prove that something was following me along the trail and was breaking trees because I didn't see it, but it does coincide with a lot of different evidence and things that people or other people's experiences with Sasquatch. And so, that's kind of what a lot of this is like, well, other people have seen rocks being thrown or footprints and then something else happened, and it just happens a lot. So, but my parents were camping one night, this was years and years ago, by a lake, and I don't remember if they said anyone else was camping around the lake with them, but I want to say there wasn't because the story seemed to have freaked them out a little bit. Like, what the heck was that? And then, like, the middle of the night, they were woken up because something big, like, got thrown into the lake. They said it wasn't like it was an animal swimming into the lake or something jumped in the water or something, but it sounded like a huge rock was just chucked right into the lake. Both of them woke up and were like, what the heck was that? But yeah, like you said, that something needs to be able to grab that with like their fingers and their thumbs, because like a bear can't pick up a rock and throw it. A deer can't pick up a rock and throw it because it has hooves, not hands.
Not hands, yeah.
Even a mountain lion doesn't have hands. I mean, it's a cat, and cats are a little more agile and stuff than I think a deer is, but even that can't throw rocks and things.
Yeah, no, I if that were to happen to me, like, and I knew there weren't people around, like, that would freak me out a little bit. I'd be like, what in the world was that? I mean, one thing that's kind of nice, and it's like a blessing and a curse to know about Bigfoot, because on one hand, you can now attribute that to something. If me and you were camping and we knew no one else was around and a rock got tossed into the water, we would basically be like, oh, that's Bigfoot. And then we'd be like, oh shoot, that's Bigfoot. Like,
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, super interesting. I barely remember you telling me that story before, actually. That's kind of cool. I feel like I heard that for the first time. Did your parents ever mention where that was? Was that in Washington or Oregon or somewhere else? Or do you not remember?
I think it was probably Washington, because my mom grew up in Tri-Cities. My dad was over in Spokane. And so I think when they first got married, they were living in Washington. Yeah. I don't know whereabouts, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, it is totally a blessing and a curse knowing, yeah, because like if I'm ever out hiking and any of these things that we're talking about start happening, I'm going to start, your mind starts, because we don't know what Sasquatch is, or if they're, some stories people tell they're aggressive, some people they're not aggressive, some people it's just like they just are there and that there's not really a whole lot to it. But there's so many different, stories people tell of their experiences, but we just don't know what they are. And so knowing that they're there based off of things that you're seeing in the area can be a little unnerving.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, the reason for me why I'm so fascinated by the subject is because I think like a lot of people, one of my worst fears is just the unknown. Like the fact that we don't know anything about what these actually are. It's a very strange feeling knowing that it's there but not knowing what it is. Being able
Yeah.
to put
Uh-huh.
being able to put like a face to it is one thing, but like not having ever seen that thing in real life is strange. Because if I hear like snuffling around the tent and stuff getting knocked over and hear like some grunting or whatever, and I see the shape of a bear in the firelight, like I'm gonna be scared, but like I know it's a bear, and I know as long as I don't have food in the tent and I don't have anything super yummy in there to smell, like it's probably just gonna move on. And I know what bears are like, even though I haven't seen one in the wild. I've seen them at zoos. I've seen them on movies. And a bear is familiar, but Sasquatch, it's like, yeah, we have a general image in our mind. We've seen pictures drawn. We've seen the Patterson Gimlin film, but like we can't really visualize what these specific ones are going to look like or what they're even, and we definitely don't know anything as to what they are, if they're human or animal or a mix of both, or if they're supernatural or natural. Like we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and when you start getting those things happening, your mind starts going into different things like, well, what could that have been? And then if you start thinking about it and it's leaning more towards, one thing versus the other, it can be a little spooky.
yeah, and I guess this might sound foolish to some people, but that's only because I think it's only what I'm about to say. I think will only sound foolish to those who aren't convinced that these are real, because I'm more afraid of a Bigfoot in the campsite than I am of a bear, just because a bear I can predict. A Bigfoot, I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason why and that actually that's a good segue into one of the sort of signs to look for, and that is the sense of doom or sense of dread that can come on people while they're having some interactions with these things. Between me and you, I feel like I can only speak with some authority just because I only feel like that's what I'm attributing this to, but I have felt that sense of darkness, if you will, like a very kind of gross feeling inside while out in the forest. That one time camping with Dalton, which the audience has listened to and heard in a couple past episodes ago. But it's not always reported though. Like there are some reports where people will get that feeling, and then others where they don't feel anything at all. And then there's even other reports where some people have like a really positive interaction with them. So that's another part that's just so unpredictable about these things. What do you make of the sense of doom, or that people will feel every once in a while reported with these things?
Maybe another way of putting it too is like something's watching you, like you just feel like something's super off, like, I feel like something's watching me, or like I shouldn't be here right now. And I had felt that several times in Oregon, both times of fishing along different rivers, and one in Western Oregon, one in Central Oregon. And yeah, one of them, I think I was by myself, and so I was maybe just freaking myself out, because at that time I had been, that's kind of when I had started looking at Bigfoot a little more and had read some firsthand encounters and things. And so then I was out by myself in, Siuslaw National Forest, which is pretty heavily treed. And I had actually looked up like the area that we lived in at the time out there in Dallas, which does connect to the national forest up in the outside of town quite a ways.
Yeah.
But I, freaking myself out. I never saw anything, smelled anything, heard anything. I just was, something could have been watching me for all I know, but it also could have been my brain playing tricks on me. Second time, hiking along Metolius River there, out by Sisters, Camp Sherman area. And I was with someone, and I had gone, I don't know, I was probably only like 200 feet down the trail from them along the river. And I got that really bad feeling like something's watching me. I started getting really uncomfortable, so I kind of just like stopped and waited for him to catch up, or maybe I turned and walked back towards him. But I was like, something's not right now. Like, I don't feel very great about what's happening.
Yeah.
Nothing ever happened, but I'm glad I had someone else with me, because I was definitely starting to get that creepy feeling, which I thought was weird because he was just behind me on the trail. I thought that was super strange to feel that way when someone else is near me, because usually, like, you get that more comfortable sense, like, oh, well, I'm not by myself. But even though he was really close, I was still getting that kind of creepy, eerie feeling.
Yeah, I think there's like kind of this fine line, but I think it's more like a Venn diagram, I guess, where there is like a border where they meet, because I have felt kind of two different experiences, and they both are accounted on the episode where I told people about my own experiences rather than other people's stories, that episode. But the one in Idaho, I've had that feeling where I felt like it was whatever was up in the trees in the Targhee or Caribou Targhee National Forest. Like, I felt like something was watching me, but that was kind of all I felt. It felt creepy in the sense that, like, oh, something is watching me. That's weird. But then the night with Dalton, though, like, it was different. It wasn't just that things were watching me, because we felt that, but it was this like sense that bad things were going to happen, like inevitably. Like, if I stayed there, bad and scary things were going to happen. Like, I kept on having like these imagined like scenarios where like I'm in my tent and all of a sudden I see a handprint getting pushed into the tent, like, and those were like weird imagination, like tricks or not tricks, but like I don't know, visions, if you will, like that I wasn't asking for, that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. It almost felt like, I don't know, it was like a dark, like, Dalton described it as, he lived in Ghana, Africa, when he was serving his mission there, and he lived there for 2 years, and he told me that the only time he felt something similar to what we felt when we were up on that in that area where we camped, was when people were messing around with dark, like, voodoo in Africa. And so, there's like I said, it's more like a Venn diagram in my opinion, because you've got the sense of being watched, which is definitely something people should be aware of while they're out in the wilderness. But there's also that like sense of doom that's just like scary and very, for lack of a better term, like spiritually dark. That's like weird. But once again, like, me and Dalton never saw anything, so I can't entirely say that I know that it was Bigfoot, but I have heard of other people's accounts where they have seen them and know that what they saw, and then experienced that feeling of that sort of sense of doom. Now, like I said on the podcast, and like I've told you, Cooper, I've often wondered if that's an effect, if it's less of a spiritual thing, and, well, I mean, it could be a spiritual thing, but it also could be something more easily explained by science with the whole idea of infrasound, like certain animals have, where they will emit this low-level frequency that kind of makes you feel sick, and for some people can give you that sense of doom or whatever that people will have, or sense of dread. I don't know. It's a weird thing, because I wonder if Bigfoot are like people, where you've probably, Cooper, I know this. I'm for sure that you've had this. Like, there are some people that you meet and you just have a good vibe with them. You feel good when you're around them. They make you feel good. And then there are other people where you're like, oh, I feel heavy around you. Like, you've got some darkness in you. Like, you've been up to no good, or you're currently like something's going on where you just don't feel good around them. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I totally know what you're talking about.
So that just makes me wonder if the Sasquatch creatures, or anything in this sort of realm of legends and connections that could have to do with Bigfoot, like if they're, good and dark kind of like entities. And I wonder if amidst the Bigfoot and Sasquatch creatures, if there's like certain species of them, or certain tribes of them that have engaged in, dark practices that give that weird feeling. And there's good ones that are, not doing that. Or if possibly there's like, maybe all of them have that ability to use that infrasound or whatever to to try and get people off their territory, you know, and they can emit that sound that makes you get that weird feeling. Like, I don't know. It's definitely a super fascinating aspect of the phenomenon, and it's definitely not, like I said, it's not experienced by everyone. I know there's plenty of stories of people who've had you know, neutral to positive experiences with these things. So I wouldn't say, yep, they're all a bunch of demons. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that is a weird part that gets associated with them. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next thing. Let's see here. We've only got a few left here, but one of them is the idea of bluff charges and that paralleling. So we kind of already talked a little bit about it, but I've heard lots of stories about people who will feel like they're getting paralleled in the woods, like they've got someone following them right next to them, and I've experienced that on a less concrete level, because it wasn't so, I should say, it didn't feel like there was a full grown like person that was following. It just felt like something was kind of in the woods walking around the same place that I was, like just beyond my line of sight. But like, people will describe that feeling of like, or not feeling, but like the being able to hear something walking right alongside them, and even something coming at them in the woods, like a freight train just smashing towards them, and then all of a sudden it veers off to the right or to the left, and yet they can't see anything, you know, which they call a bluff charge. But that's something to kind of, I guess, be aware of as to some of the things that these creatures do, I guess. You've heard of that, right?
Yeah. I haven't ever experienced it myself, but I have heard of that, where people hear something like every time they move, something in the bushes next to them like will move, and then they stop, and then the noise stops. But then every time they keep walking, something right next to them is making that noise.
Totally creepy. Like it's just like a weird thing, because it's like, okay, whatever this is intelligent, you know, because like a deer isn't going to do that. Like, only, I mean, maybe it could be attributed to a predator like a cougar. But like, and if that's also equally creepy, because you don't want to get eaten by a cougar, but like, but still, like, the fact that does get attributed to Sasquatch is just kind of a weird thing, because it's like, why are they doing that? You know, like, what's the point of that? Like, I don't understand the motive there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either. I don't know what someone gets from that, so.
Yeah. So that's something for the audience to be kind of aware of, is the idea of paralleling and bluff charges. And then something that has, I think, kind of been mentioned by you, Cooper, but I wanted to just touch on a little bit more, is the whole idea of silence in the woods. And that was something that, like, the audience is aware of on that same episode, the camping trip with Dalton. Like, definitely, you know, felt that silence before. Should have been crickets, should have been frogs, should have been birds, nothing, just total, absolute silence. And, you know, people will say, like, well, that happens sometimes when there are apex predators around, so it could be a bear or a wolf or a cougar or something like that, and animals will shut up sometimes when they're on the prowl, and I get that, you know, but, like, what's weird is when, like, you're hanging, you know, you're in the woods, and you're walking through a part where it's you know, birds chirping and frogs croaking and everything, and then you get just a few feet ahead of you, and all of a sudden it's silent there. You know, like, that's weird to me. And I've heard a lot of different people talk about that. Have you?
Yeah, and that was the other weird thing about the day that we were out. And I think I mentioned this in the other one I was in, but we didn't hear any noises. And I mean, I told that to someone I work with, and he's like, oh, that's because, you know, all the birds migrate. I'm like, no, but there's still birds that live here all the time.
Yeah, especially in the Northwest. Like, I know for a fact, like in Oregon and Washington, like, birds, some of them go south for the winter, but there's always birds. No matter any time of year, you're going to hear birds.
We didn't hear anything. I didn't see any birds, nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that harsh of winters, so
No.
many birds will stay behind and deal with the rain, you know? The silence in the woods thing makes me, you know, I mean, it could be just the fact that Bigfoot is so huge, and possibly, you know, I mean, not possibly, I've heard plenty of stories about them hunting deer and elk and stuff, so therefore they are predatory in that sense. So that could be that could be the answer, is just the fact that they are a apex predator, so everything's gonna shut up. But I always, of course, my brain always wanders to the supernatural. You know, I always wonder if there's some kind of sort of weird dimensional or spiritual kind of aspect to why that is. If it's something that's not necessarily kind of supposed to be here on this, in this reality, in this realm, like if that's why things are like, whoa, what the heck is this? I don't know. It's just something food for thought for the audience.
Yeah, because I've heard several stories, where deer and things are just like one of the podcasts I've listened to, the guy was driving and the deer just like stopped in the middle of the road and was like not even paying attention to his car and was just totally transfixed on something out in the field, and that's when he had his old encounter. But it was very just like zoned in and locked in on that thing instead of the car, which is weird because usually, if you're driving and there's a deer in the road, it panics or whatever, but not this one.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that too, where a hunter will be in the woods and all of a sudden the deer that he's going after will run right towards him or right past him as if there's no, because of something that the hunter and the deer both heard or saw. And that's weird because like if a deer is thinking I'll take the human over whatever this is, then that whatever that thing is big and bad, because we're used to being the biggest and baddest thing in the woods that everything is afraid of. And if there's something else that's bigger and badder than us, that the deer, to the point where the deer is like, I'll take going to the human. I'll run right in his direction. I don't even care. I'd rather get shot than be torn to shreds by this thing,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Like that's, for sure something that's, gets reported a lot and something to be aware of, the audience. Like if everything goes quiet, whether it's Bigfoot or not, because it could also be, like I said, it could be some other predator. Like if everything goes quiet in the woods, you should pay attention and probably try and skedaddle out of that area, because usually that doesn't mean anything good is going to happen or that it's a good part of the woods, Yeah,
because and another thing too, and I don't know if maybe I'm remembering or hearing this incorrectly, but like even like a storm can make animals go quiet too. So not only is it if it's something like a Sasquatch or something, but even like like a bad storm coming in, everything goes quiet. So
that's true.
Yeah, it never means anything good.
Yeah, that's true. So then one of the next things that we're gonna go to is bad weather. So this has more, I think, to do with the whole missing 411 phenomena with David Paulides. But often when people will go missing, a case of bad weather will come in, whether it's a storm or rain or something. But often people will talk about when they see a Bigfoot, like before or after. Not always. There's plenty of stories about Bigfoot that are just, in a nice sunny day. But like quite often people will report that like it was a nice sunny day and then all of a sudden either they see a Bigfoot and then a storm comes in, or it gets overcast or something, or it gets stormy and overcast and then they see Bigfoot. Like I don't know. I think it could be just total coincidence, but I think that is also kind of interesting.
I feel like there's not a lot of coincidences.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, that one's not one that I want to get too into. I think that would be something to talk more about if we ever have a podcast about the whole missing 411 with David Paulides discussion, and how people go missing and some of the weird coincidences or the weird things that are associated with that. So then the second to last one that I wanted to talk about was the vocalizations, and I've kind of categorized them into 4, but there might be more, and we can just talk about them all. But the 4 things that often get reported as far as the sounds that Bigfoot will make, which are whoops. So like kind of it's just sound like how when we whoop, like as humans, like that same kind of sound, but a Bigfoot will make it. And then also howls are like which often gets reported kind of like a woman wailing mixed with like some kind of animal, or kind of like a wolf but like way bigger. Imitation is another one that people will say that they'll do. Like they'll imitate all kinds of animals, all kinds of human noises and voices, as well as like the sounds of like everyday things like cars getting their doors slammed or tent zippers and stuff. Like it's just strange random sounds that get reported during like or after or before encounters, as well as the whole chatter, the sort of language that apparently they have. And we can have a whole podcast on some of the ideas around Bigfoot language, but a lot of people have come to call that whole phenomena samurai chatter because it sounds kind of like those old karate movies where you got the samurais that are speaking real low and very quickly and very sort of electric kind of chitter chatter to each other in Japanese, whereas the Bigfoot, some of the sounds that are reported kind of sound like that, where it's like this weird chatter kind of sound, and this is a lot of that has been recorded on the Sierra sounds that Ron Moorhead and Al Berry recorded in the 70s in the Sierra Nevadas and California, and you can go hear that on YouTube. But what do you make of all the different sounds that Bigfoot makes, Cooper? What are some of the ones you would want to hear, and other ones you wouldn't want to hear?
Well, some of the recordings I've heard, they have sounded very creepy, very, very creepy. Some of the screams that they make, you hear the ones where it sounds like a mix of like a lion and a lady screaming. They don't sound good. I was going to talk about this, and one of the difficult things too, is like you could go out in the woods and hear an owl or hear maybe a dove or something, and it's like even if it was something else making that noise, it'd be so hard to tell,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Back to that, because I remember one time I was in the woods and I was out biking and I heard a dove, and I started making the whistling noise back to it, and it was me and it were like basically having like a little conversation back and forth while making these noises.
Dude, that's weird.
Yeah, which I've done that with doves before, just kind of messing with them, because if you start doing that, sometimes they'll come over if you call them in.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I thought back to that. I'm like, in all reality, it could have been, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't talk about this part on the episode where I was talking about my own experiences, but when I was on that same experience where the rock got thrown at me and Steve, before the rock throwing, actually we got out and there was an owl that started hooting. It would I would make a hoot sound and it would make a hoot sound. I'd make 2 hoot sounds, it would make 2 hoot sounds. I'd make 3, it would make 3, and then like at one point there was like a part where it almost stuttered, like it was like instead of just going hoo hoo, it was like ooh 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 hoo ooh ooh hoo, and I was like, what's like, I've never heard an owl that sounded like it can't make the owl sound correctly, like
Yeah.
and so and it was in that same area where the tree breaks were, where the little nesting ground looking places were, where the rock got thrown at us, and it was that in that same part of the woods from where the rock got thrown. So like that was like kind of weird. I mean, it could have been just a weird owl, but like people have often said, and this is also something that is in Native American folklore, the idea that they're like the best imitators. They're like ventriloquists. They can throw their voices. They can imitate anything. And if you think about it, like only humans are really that good. Well, no, because parrots are pretty good at imitating, and some animals are, but humans are also the next best, I'd say, imitators. But then also just the fact that like that would make you a really good hunter, to be able to imitate any animal, because you could call in. I mean, that's what we do when we go hunting. Like you make duck calls and things like that. We've had to create them, with technology and little tools and stuff. But like if they can just do it with their throat, and their voice cords, or vocal cords, like that. That's intense. Like that would make you a really, really good predator.
It really would, because I mean, you think about like people hunting and stuff. They're able to call in animals, or do wounded injury calls, or not wounded injury, wounded animal calls, like with like coyotes and stuff.
Yeah.
And the rabbit noises, and then the coyote comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it would make them a really good predator.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like, I've heard plenty of people, mostly the skeptics, that are like, well, how convenient that Bigfoot can make any noise, so now you can attribute any noise to Bigfoot. And I would say, yeah, you're right. Like, there are people who take it a little too far. Like, I know that on one of the Les Stroud episodes where he's with Todd Standing, he even says, he's like, yeah, sometimes I think Todd thinks that every sound is Bigfoot out in the woods. And he's like, I get that they can imitate, but not everything is, and I would say, yeah, like you're totally right. Like for some people, I'd say you can take it too far, but on the other, in that same token, I can say often I feel like a lot of people report how they'll hear, like I said, like something's a little off. Like it sounds like a owl at first, and then eventually it starts to sound a little bit weird. Or some people will say it's like, yeah, that I've never heard an owl that sounds like it's 600 pounds. Like that is a little too deep sounding for an owl. Like if you hear a hoo, like that's not gonna be a normal owl. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like even though they might be really good imitators, there can be mistakes made, and that's when you can kind of figure out, okay, is this actually an animal, or is this a Bigfoot imitating an animal? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's hard to say because like you just don't have any idea unless you see it. It sounds, I mean, you were telling me about the one the other day or maybe was it you with the no, I think I was listening to the David Paulides video from a couple weeks back, and he was talking about the guy who heard the people talking, and he heard like a rifle noise, so like it was being loaded, but there's no one there.
Oh yeah. See, that's weird, especially when you hear, and Ron Moorhead as well, up in the Sierra Nevadas camp, he talks about how, they would hear like pots and pans getting moved around, and there were no pots and pans like outside of their tents, and it's like, or they would hear like the sound of like a giant tuning fork or something. Like when you hear stuff that is very that it can only be found in the outside of the wilderness, like in the cities and suburbs and stuff like that, like that's weird. Like you shouldn't be hearing those noises when you're deep in the forest or out in the middle of the desert or something, like those are sounds that are being created by something, and that's definitely weird.
Yeah, and every time I hear any kind of noise in the future, I'm going to be thinking that's what it is.
Yeah, and once again, like we have to remember, like especially if you're in, say, a national forest, like even if you feel alone, it's very possible there's someone else there, and therefore, like if you do hear a gun cock or something like that, like it's quite possible there's someone there, and maybe they don't want to be seen, maybe they're hunting or something, or poaching, or who knows. Like it doesn't mean it's always Bigfoot, but it is something to just be aware of. I would also say for me, I would give this more credibility just because this is something that was passed down by the Native Americans, who there would have been less people with the kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I'm just saying, like, because this was something that has been known about for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, like it's something that I want to pay more attention to. It's not just some new idea concocted by the Bigfoot quote unquote researchers. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now the last part that I wanted to talk about, and is the most interesting to me, and I think the most out there for a lot of listeners, especially the ones that are in the camp of, oh, it's just a monkey that we haven't caught up with yet, and that is the balls of light, the floating orbs of light. And that, for the listeners who aren't aware, very often, I would say probably at least maybe around half of the accounts that you'll hear about Bigfoot, when the witness is asked about these things, they'll usually confirm that these are also associated, and it's these weird balls of light, or orbs of spheres of light, and they can range anywhere from being like a golf ball size to a beach ball, and they range in color. They can be white, blue, yellow, green, and sometimes they shrink or expand, and they will move around. They'll change colors sometimes. And it seems to most people that there's like a sentience, or I don't know how to say that. Like there's like an intelligence about them, where they're not just moving randomly, they're moving with a purpose. And a lot of times people will see these things either before they see a Bigfoot, or after they see a Bigfoot, or at the same time as seeing a Bigfoot, or in the same place as the Sasquatch. Like encounter is. Sometimes it's on their property. Like, these things are very often reported, and very often, especially when reported to the BFRO, the Bigfoot, what is that called, Cooper? The BFRO, what does it stand for? Do you remember?
No.
Yeah, I can't remember right now, but it's one of the, like, the official, like, Bigfoot reporting sites, and the owner of that site, he'll scrap that. Like, if anyone will say I saw a Bigfoot and also the floating orbs, like, he and a lot of other, like, researchers and stuff, they'll just leave out that part, and they'll just talk about the seeing of the Bigfoot. But what's weird, I'm like, that's so dishonest, because I'm like, you I don't know. I just feel like shame on them, because if you really want to find out the truth about what these things are, you have to give credibility to all of it, not just the parts you like, And so that's definitely something to be kind of aware of. Cooper, what do you think about the whole lights thing? Was it, because you're more recent into this, I've had a little more time to sort of adjust my worldview when it comes to these things, and the believability of the fact that there are little orbs of light out there. I've never seen one yet, but I've come to the point where I'm like, yeah, I know those are out there. What do you think of them?
Yeah, when I first heard it, honestly, I wasn't sure what to even think of it. I thought it was super weird, and the first podcast I heard that mentioned it, I just thought, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, these people are on drugs, or I don't know, hallucinating, something.
Yeah.
But then the more I listened to stuff and, started thinking about things more, I guess that's how it goes, though, because, everyone comes into this topic probably thinking it's some kind of North American ape, and it changes very quickly once you start listening to people's encounters and stuff. It just doesn't sound like it's something. It doesn't sound like it could just be an animal.
Yeah, there's some strangeness to it, for sure. Like these things that sound like they're something out of a fairy tale or of a sci-fi novel. I know when I first started hearing them, I was about the lights. I was like, huh, that's interesting. I love looking into the folklore and legends of my own sort of ancestry, and on my mom's side of the family, who we have strong roots in the in Great Britain and Ireland, and there's the whole legend of the will-o'-the-wisps, or jack-o'-lanterns. That's where we get that word jack-o'-lantern for Halloween from, is the idea that there were in ancient times, like, and even still to this day, there are people who still encounter the same sort of phenomenon, but it's like these, I don't know if they're the same as the floating orbs, or if they're like a variation of them or something, but it's like these like little balls of light or flames, or little like flickering kind of fire things that will pop up, and they'll either lead you to your destiny or your fate, right? They lead you to either your death or your they'll lead you to treasure or your great fortune or something. And for me, I'm like, I would suggest don't follow the lights, because that 50-50 is not good odds. If death is one of the options, and
yeah.
But as soon as, and then also on my dad's side, who's of that side of the family is of Cajun French descent down in Louisiana, and they've got something called I don't know if I'm pronouncing it entirely correctly, but it's feu follet, and the feu follet are also like these little lights that appear in the bayou, and it's a very similar kind of folklore surrounding it. And I know me and you have talked a little bit about this, Cooper, where there's in the scientific community, they have discovered a somewhat of an explanation for at least the ones that are seen in swampy areas and bogs, because they talk about how the gases from the bogs or swamps will kind of float to the surface, and then because of some sort of something going on in the air, they will ignite and sort of spontaneously combust, and then there'll be a little flash of like fire, and then it will go out.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's not, that couldn't be an explanation, or that it's an explanation for some of them. But the thing is, though, when it comes to the will-o'-the-wisps or fufule or whatever, and the balls of light, like the spheres of light, like they're not just found in swamps. Like people see them in the desert, they'll see them in the forest, they'll see them on mountains. Like it's everywhere. So it's like I don't know, because I don't know what the separating line is between the different lights throughout folklore and throughout reality. Like I can't say whether or not like which ones are the one that's explained by science and which ones aren't, but the fact is that science does have an explanation for something, but people are also seeing something else that's different, these things that are in other locations other than just swamps. So like, yeah, it's definitely strange. And yeah, do you have you ever thought about like what they could be or have any sort of explanation for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a topic for a different podcast as far as like the full explanation of it, just because you and me have I don't know if you've done this in a separate podcast, but the whole connection to religion and like the Bible and stuff.
Yeah, and we'll have a different episode about that, but yeah, because if we want to talk more in depth about this, then that'll give listeners something to look forward to more. But I was just curious if if you had any more thoughts. You haven't seen any of them, right? Yeah.
No, I haven't seen any.
Yeah. And I haven't really either. I feel like it seems like there are certain places where they're seen, and like I said, they're associated with Bigfoot. So like, I wonder if there's a connection. Like if they only appear around Bigfoot. There have been people who claim that they've seen Bigfoot turn into the balls of light. Now that for me is wild, and that's for another podcast too. And some people have said that a lot of the Native Americans will refer to them as being little, like they're spirits of sorts. Some people will say that they're like somehow they're like portals or something. There's all kinds of fun and interesting and sometimes just loco conclusions as to what they are. But that is something just for the audience to be aware of. Like if you are seeing the balls of light or the orbs or spheres of light, whatever you want to call them, or even the little flames or something like that, like any of that stuff, I feel like can be associated with the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. So people be aware when you're out in the wilderness and you see that, like you could be running into Sasquatch territory. I don't know, but any suggestions, Cooper, for the audience as to like when it comes to all of the Sasquatch lore that we've just discussed, the trace evidence that we have, like what kind of do you have any sort of wisdom for them?
No, not anything other than what we've kind of talked about.
Yeah, I just say be aware, and that's one of the first things that I think is fun about this whole topic is just learning about the different things that are associated with it. And I'd say the only it's not really wisdom, it's just good, decent advice. I'd just say be smart, because really we don't know anything about these. And I would also say like focus or pay attention to your perception, because like if you're feeling like it's gonna be, if you're like if you're having any kind of interactions with these creatures and it feels off, like it feels like it's wrong, then I would be smart, and whatever that means for you, for whoever's out there, like be smart in that situation. And if it feels right, like it feels good or something like that, I'd also still just say be cautious, because like you never know. Once again, we don't know what these things are. That's the whole fun and the mystery of it. And I'm not here to preach whether you should have a gun or not, or bear spray or whatever, but like just be smart, whatever that means for you. It could even mean for some to go in unarmed if they are perceiving that these things are going to attack, if they are seeing something like that. I don't know, but I know that you can probably run into these things wherever you're at throughout the United States. If you go out into the wilderness, there will be parts of it. Not everywhere, but I'll bet there are parts in any region where there are stories about these things, or reports of them, and people will have plenty to say about it if you ask around and talk to the right people. So, well, Cooper, I think we're going to end it for the night. It's been about an hour and a half, so it's a pretty solid amount of information for people to consume. So thanks for being on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Look forward to more episodes in the future.
Same here. Thanks for listening to the BLC. Be sure to subscribe and share. And it would be really awesome if you'd be willing to take just a minute to give us a review, as that helps this show out a ton.